I'm going to call the Amherst Finance Committee meeting of April 12th, 2012 to order at 7:05 p.m. and welcome everybody who's present. Thank you all for being here, and thank Amherst Media for providing this for people who will be able to watch it at home on demand and on Amherst Media as it's broadcast, so thank you. The agenda for tonight is going to start with FY13 budget items. Two things. Our finance director is going to very briefly report on news affecting budget, and then a little bit later in the evening we'll have a little bit more opportunity to talk about what some of the implications that I don't want to have a long discussion now because I'd like to, as quickly as possible after that, turn to the discussion of the school community partnership for out-of-school time program discussion. So Sandy?
Thank you. I just want to pass out something that you may have seen. It's just a one-pager from the MMA about the House Ways and Means budget to get some sense of what's in there. Anybody else who wants it is welcome to it. So the House Ways and Means budget came out yesterday, and we have the budget document itself, which shows us two big accounts, the Chapter 70 education aid and the general unrestricted aid. We are still waiting for the state to give us updated cherry sheets based on that. So there are some other accounts that we know have changed, but we don't know by how much. The quick good news is that the House Ways and Means Committee decided to restore the $65 million in general government aid that they've been talking about giving back to us at the end of the fiscal year, but they've put it in the base. Plus they added some money for Chapter 70. So it's a little over $500,000 if that in fact comes true. So that's good news.
Yes, it is.
It's still early in the process, I want to emphasize. This is the House Ways and Means Committee's recommendation. The House will vote on this bill before the end of the month, but then it has to go over to the Senate, and then they have to go into conference, and they have to get the governor to sign it, and without vetoes to maintain that level. I think while the state economy and tax collections have been good so far this year, they're ahead of where they were last year. They're still slightly below their target for where they expect it to be, what they call their benchmark. So the House has dipped into some reserves in order to come up with this money, and it's cut almost $200 million worth of out of other departments. There are big cuts to public safety and human services and other state agencies. So it will be interesting to see whether the Senate goes along with those same policy choices, because I think they are going to have some pretty major impacts on those state agencies. We can talk about it more in detail later in the meeting, but I think that the recap at this point is we have some initial good news. It's not final good news yet, and there's a lot of political process that has to go forward before we'll really know what these numbers are.
Okay. So thank you, Sandy. I wanted to just share that at the beginning of the meeting because it's always nice to start on a positive note, even if it's a tentative positive note. We will talk about this probably a little bit further later in the evening, but I did want to go on to the second item on the printed agenda as quickly as we could get to it, because there's several people who are here for that purpose and are always welcome to stay but may not want to stay beyond that. So Our town manager and superintendent of schools are with us, the chair of the regional school committee is with us, and the director of LSSC is with us, and we appreciate it because this is a program that in some ways is a continuation of some current work that's going on for many years, but also a substantial redesign and a different way of funding it. And it is requesting that the money come from an amendment that we discussed last week to the community services budget, but did not vote on, pending the opportunity for the discussion tonight, to replace funds that had previously come into a similar program, but not identical program, from the Community Development Block Grant. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to either Maria or John to give us some more specifics.
Sure, and thank you, Andy. This is an exciting time for partnerships in the community, I think. As we work very closely with our colleagues in higher education at UMass, Amherst College, Hampshire College. We're working with our landlord community on things related to safe and healthy neighborhoods, in particular focus on issues with rental properties. But we're also I'm pleased to be here with Superintendent Garrick and Linda Chalfant to offer a specific recommendation for the FY13 budget that would add $40,000 to the community services budget in the LSSE budget that would fund income eligible families subsidies to what we think will be a stronger, more coordinated, collaborative after-school program at our 3 elementary schools. That would be also the other part of the recommendation to do the accounting for all of this is to create a new revolving fund, similar in concept to the existing LSSE revolving fund for which covers most of their programming, but there's a specific one, different section of the statute that this would be a separate revolving fund just for this program. And it would be separate because in the staffing model for this program there would be three full-time employees who are eligible for benefits, and by having a separate revolving fund under this other statute, that allows program revenues to pay full-time salaries plus benefits, which are not allowed to be paid in the existing revolving fund. So that requires an authorization by town meeting to set that up. So all of the monies from program participants, this town subsidy for tuition subsidies, is a little bit of money from the schools and possibly from some grants, would all flow into this revolving fund. We do the program. Superintendent Garrick is going to summarize a memo explaining kind of the big picture of the program, but it's based upon detailed recommendations that the town and the schools jointly funded an independent study from the Wellesley College National Institute of Out-of-School Time. They've recently completed a comprehensive report with a whole series of recommendations, and so we're very, very excited about the budding partnership here, and Maria will summarize it for you.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief with the programmatic aspects. So again, as John mentioned, we have had this evaluation conducted for us because we've been in conversation with our after-school programs for over a year and a half, 2 years now. And while we have very strong programs, we have individual vendors who provide after-school programs in the schools, and we have leisure services programs. And in some cases, we have multiple programs in one school. So the conversation has been how to align programs and services so that families can access programs at a school with an equal cost not depending on which school they're in, and have the opportunity for income eligible students to attend at a reduced rate. We also wanted to look at the quality of programs across the school so that we can ensure some consistency and not only academic intervention for students, but outdoor playtime, physical activities, field trips, and enrichment activities. So we've been working together as a group for quite a while now, and landed on having Wellesley come in because they are a national group who has spent a substantial amount of time doing this type of work and who could make some recommendations around the type of programming that typically serves students best. So their recommendations were very clearly that the school should be partnering with the town in this case to manage the programs. They recommended modeling our programs similar to a program in Newton, where there's a true collaboration between school and community. So where we are at this moment, we've taken the recommendations from this evaluation and we have provided an organizational structure which has an advisory committee of members, the directors as well as town and schools. John and I would have program oversight. We both hold responsibility for the programs. And then Linda and Marta from the schools would be kind of the closer people to the work. And then the schools would be hiring a part-time out-of-school time coordinator to ensure that there's tight coordination and communication between the school day and the after-school program. And as you can see from the orientational chart, that the principals would have a much tighter hand in the programs as well. And there would be one site director, program director per school. If you just take a quick look at page 2 and 3, you'll see that there are program recommendations that were specifically made from the evaluation, which has a broader body with those recommendations on the following pages, page 3 and 4. But then we talk a little bit about program resources, and you can see what the schools would be providing, which historically the school has not provided funding for after-school programs, and years back actually charged for space in our schools. So the school district responsibilities would be to provide space free of charge, provide principal support, have an out-of-school time coordinator, provide professional development so that there's a cohesive approach between how we're addressing issues around behavior or emotional support to students in the school day as well as in the after-school program, so a much more coordinated approach to addressing students' needs. So the school would be responsible for providing that professional development. We would also provide funds for 3 days a week of students going home. So that provides access to many more students being able to attend after school. And then we would have academic interventions that we would be providing the funding for. And then the town responsibilities are the leisure services having the oversight of the program structure, as you see, staffing, snacks, materials, and such. And then hopefully a portion of the subsidies, which would be what we're discussing tonight, which is the $40,000. So at this point, these are solid recommendations from this organization, and we're pleased to see a model that we think will work for the schools, and which the schools have funds to provide through Title I for income eligible students. And it sounds like the town is as supportive as we are to developing this strong partnership and strong programming for our children. So we have steps toward implementation, which we will begin shortly. We're setting up a meeting right now with the current providers, and we'll be taking those steps to hire and create the structure to move forward for September. So that was a very quick overview of where we are.
I also have budget information, which once we get past the program, get into the budget.
And I'd like to thank, of course, John and Linda for the partnership and the work kind of looking at this potential, and then Sandy for taking the time to really walk through the financials with me to make sure that we had a budget set up.
Linda, did you have anything you wanted to say, or just here to answer questions that come up?
It's been a pleasure working with Marta and Maria and school staff, and we're really looking forward to this opportunity. We think it's going to be outstanding for the school, the entire community, to have just really a seamless, working together, coordinated program, and we're ready to go.
I think the one question that came up at the budget coordinating, or one question that came up at the budget coordinating group meeting was concern about your time and recognizing the vast responsibilities you're already undertaking for us and overseeing all of the LSSC programs, the pools, golf course, and is this one more that's beyond your?
Well, I appreciate the empathy, perhaps. I guess I want to say that I have thought of, I certainly have thought about that as well too. But when I think about it and have perhaps a moment of concern, I realize that we are already at many times of the year working with vast numbers of children. During the summer, we have camp programs where we're really enrolling children, programming activities, ensuring their safety. Upwards of 200 children a week, throughout the summer, in a very condensed period of time. And then I would add that we are also specifically engaged with 2 after-school programs currently, and I'm expecting additional children to be participating, but that increase will probably be somewhat gradual. So I think it's something we're prepared to step forward. I do appreciate the concerns about our juggling, and we know we have excellent partners and leadership coming from the school as well as the town to help us with this.
Other questions? Kate.
I don't know what the scale of the current number of children served and what you anticipate is going to.
Sure.
Become.
Shall I start? And then I
Sure.
think we're around
Yes.
180-ish. And I think with the numbers that we've budgeted for, around 200. So we're not talking about a substantial increase for the first year, because again, we want to make sure that we're charging a rate that will sustain the staffing that we're putting in place. And then one of the recommendations is for additional revenue to come in. So through fundraising and a scholarship fund. So we are working on all angles, but we're making sure that as when Sandy hands out the rates for some programs will be an increase, and rates for one program will be a decrease, but the rate will be such that will maintain the numbers of students that we've projected.
Any questions at this point? Mary
You mentioned 200 as being the number, but isn't that low for the population that we have in the schools? 30%, I think, or more, free or reduced lunch, and so you're talking about a much smaller group of children, and it seemed to me that the number should be larger.
Yes.
And how would you determine which children would be in the program? Would it be based on academic need, for enrichment, or because I would assume more children will apply than there will be room in the first year. I mean, obviously it can expand over the years.
We have not had a demand that has exceeded our capacity yet. I think in general. I think that when we add transportation home, we provide an option for more families, income-eligible families, to actually attend. So until we know what that looks like, it's hard to anticipate how many students will come. I would love to see 40% of our population come to after school. But I also want to be realistic that we want to create something that we can manage and then expand and grow over time. Also, we anticipate when we're providing more enrichment and different opportunities for families, other families who may be able to afford after-school programming are accessing that programming through some private opportunities now may then come to the after-school, which then brings income as well as along with those children. So would I like to think that we had funds to say, yes, we're going to hope to enroll 400 students, yeah. But I think we have to start carefully and be very realistic with the funding that we have right now before we open up. So right now it is by enrollment, it's not by targeted invitation.
Sure.
A follow-up, in terms of the age range, going pre-K, actually nursery pre-K.
K through 6.
It's going to be K through 6.
Yes.
Okay, so in a school, if you're talking to approximately 75 some students per school, so would you have the age range of K through 6?
Yes, which we do now, yes. And we cluster younger kids of the younger kids group, so there's older kids and an older students group. Right now I think there's close to 100 students accessing Wildwood, and probably about 50 between the two programs at Cracker Farm and about 30 at Fort River. So, and then again, they break into developmental age groups, and they have a number of students which we'd love to expand. College students coming into support programs as well, and the university, UMass, as well as Amherst College, has expressed interest in stepping up and organizing more of their students to come in and support the programs as well.
Yeah.
And do you think it'll be more of an academic focus and academic enrichment focus, I should say, rather than just let's play after school on the beautiful equipment that we now have and that?
I'd like a balanced program. I absolutely believe that children need a time to be running around and playing, especially after having a long day of more traditional school setting. However, there absolutely should have an academic intervention component and some homework help for students for a period of time. And then I would love to see the arts, potentially language, the cultural affinity groups, potentially instrumental lessons for students as well. So I see more of not an academic content area, more than maybe an hour out of that, or 45 minutes out of that day, but then other non-traditional enriching activities. So opportunities that some children may not have other than being in the after-school program.
Other questions? You have another? Go ahead.
Sure. That's my field, early childhood, elementary and secondary. So in terms of hiring, you have to follow the regs of the early childhood group, or are you going to have licensed teachers or licensed childcare under?
Leisure services, as well as the other, which Linda can speak to probably much more fully than I can, have licensing requirements for an after-school program. For the school, for our academic intervention, we would use licensed teachers, and we would either be staggering staff to accommodate, starting a little bit later in the workday to go later, or we would be paying hourly stipends for those staff to deliver the academic interventions.
And the one last thing.
Yep.
And the principals, this will be part of their job,
Yes,
not as additional pay.
exactly.
Okay.
Anything else from on the programmatic side? Since Sandy's going to pass out the budget information needs.
And one more. Thank you. However many people want to come here.
As you do
Coming
this,
that way, then.
Oh, there's coming your,
yeah, Sandy, as you did this, what I thought would be helpful is if you could correlate the positions listed to the positions on this chart,
Okay.
it would be helpful, and because they're not using the same titles. And then the other is, you said there are 3 benefited positions, and I guess we need to be interested in which ones.
Yes, okay. So let's start with the first page of the budget document, which are the expenses. There are, under staff, there's director and then other director. So there's a total of 3 of them. And those correspond to what is called the site director under the names of the individual schools on this chart. So those are, site directors are what are the same as what's called director on the budget page, right? Then if you look at this org chart, right up above those, there's an out-of-school time coordinator up here. That is not on this budget page because that is being paid for by the school department. And we have a consolidated budget with all sources, which is the third page of this budget document. You'll see that showing up there. And then the people who are up above that, they're paid different ways already. All right, so we developed a budget for, so those site directors are the 3 benefited positions. They will work 30 hours a week and be entitled to health insurance benefits, at least during the 40 weeks of the year that they are employed in these positions. Then there are a series of counselors who are part-time positions and range everywhere from coordinators in kindergarten and through grades 1 through 6, we're paid an hourly wage, and then we have money for work study students. The next line down shows about $30,000 for benefits. That is to cover the health insurance and Medicare and so forth for the 3 benefited positions. Supplies are pretty self-explanatory. We've also built in a $2,000 hardship fund. That is in addition to money that we have set aside for scholarships and so forth, but it may be that sometime during the year family circumstances may change or somebody may show up that we didn't anticipate. So we have built into this budget and built into the fees that we're going to be charging enough money to fund that hardship fund. As Maria mentioned, there are also plans, and I know Maria's been looking into things, as have Linda and Barbara Biltz, and I think we've already started to secure some leads, if not commitments, for additional scholarship money that could be used for further subsidizing the participation of families and children in this program. But since that's outside money and it's kind of in the nature of gift and donations, we haven't shown them on the budget at this point, but I do think they will be there. So we have total expenses about $300,000. On the next page, I'll get into how we get to the revenue figure. And this nets out to $52,000, which would be returned to the general fund as administrative overhead. Just as we do now with the LSSE programs, there's an administrative overhead reimbursement component to cover the time that Linda and her central staff put toward any sort of oversight or coordination. And that number is very similar to the number that now is being reimbursed by these programs through the LSSE revolving fund. And so we picked a similar number for this. If you turn the page, you will see the existing fee structure at the LSSE programs and a suggested structure for new fees under this new program. So one of the interesting things about trying to figure out fees is the number of days kids attend these programs. You can attend 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or 5 days. And what you're charged depends on how many days you attend and whether one of those days is a Wednesday. Because it's a long day. So you have to factor all of that in when you figure out how much you're likely to get and how much you need to charge people. So we've done that. Or LSSE has done that, and for this existing fee structure. And then we went and looked in order to make this competitive kind of generally across the board with existing fees, and to make sure that it is generating enough funds to be self-sufficient. We're suggesting that the fees be tweaked. Those are way over on the right-hand side under new rates. And you can see these are monthly charges. So if you sent a child there 1 day a week, it would be $47 a month, which would be a $7 increase per month from what the fees are now. If you sent a child there full-time, it would be $246, which would be $31 a month more than now. But as we get into what some of the other fees are, I think you'll see that they're reasonable, certainly in keeping what fees have been traditionally and what they are competitively. There are town subsidies, the $40,000 that we've recommended, plus the $2,000 that shows up there from that hardship fund. This is just to get some idea for me of what the net revenue is going to be. One of the programs, one of the privately run programs now is eligible for some state vouchers. And our intent is to have these programs apply for those state vouchers too. But that's obviously subject to applying and being approved for those. If you then turn to the next page, this is what I call the consolidated budget. And it shows revenue and expenses from 4 different sources that make up in the entirety what this program would cost. So up above we have revenue, you see from the previous page, $360,000. The school department will supply $30,000 from its operating budget for that coordinator position. And then the Title I grant, which is a federal grant, supplies $65,000. And the way we will spend it is that the revolving fund will basically break even. The idea is that whatever we take in will be spent for salaries, benefits, supplies, that administrative overhead that I mentioned before, and that subsidy, the hardship line. And the school department will pay for that coordinator, and Title I money will be used, some for transportation and some for whatever academic intervention costs are associated with that program. So that means there's a need here for $40,000 to cover the subsidies, and that's what we're here to ask you for. I would then turn to the final page, and this is a 10-year history of what the fees for the LSSC programs have been. So over that time, they gradually escalated until they hit a high in the 2009-2010 academic year of $255 a month. Then LSSC decided to lower its fees for 2 years, partly because one of the private providers had come in and had fees that low, and for various other marketing reasons. But I think what this shows is that in the past, these fees 2 years ago were as high as $255 for a full week's attendance. We're recommending $246, which is still lower than what it historically had been. So we think that those are reasonable. And I think over time, one of the goals here would be to set the fees at a rate that attract families to an attractive, competitive, enriching program, so that families are willing to pay a reasonable amount, and that those fees, some of those fees, then be used to help subsidize other families. So there'd be a combination of subsidies from general fund, as we've done this year. We may go back again and ask CDBG, apply to them for funding. As you know, they used to fund these subsidies. They're not funding them this year. That's one of the reasons that we're looking to replace that money with some general fund money for $40,000. But I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility of setting the fees in the future at a rate that both sustains the program and has some subsidies from families who can afford to pay a market rate to those who can't. But I think starting out, certainly our recommendation is that these fees be set at this level. Again, I think they're historically within what has been something that families in Amherst have paid and have shown that they can pay. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Mary Lou.
Okay. does this take into account that, maybe with the exception of September, every month has days that children are not in school? So that when you have full-time for a week, but then they have their spring break, their winter break, they have individual holidays that are put in the calendar. So they have 180 days. So is this based on 180 days?
I think that the number of weeks factors in the fact that they're not in session all of those weeks.
Okay, so if the parent is paying for a full week and it's only a 4-day week, then they would pay the 160 that week?
I'll let Linda answer that.
Actually, the way we are operating this now, and I believe this is the way most after-school programs handle this, is that families are paying on a monthly basis. So what we have done is we've looked at the entire school academic year, and we've taken an average considering the holidays. And so parents are paying the same amount every single month, with the understanding that it is averaged out over 10 months.
So that averages out to 180 days?
It averages out to the entire academic school year. Yes, 180 days. So
And do parents have the option of vacation camps and stuff, which brings in additional revenue?
that's true, yes. Yes, the 2 vacation week camps, the spring and the winter, we have additional programming then, and yes, there
And
is.
summer.
And the summertime. There are additional fees that will be gained.
Well, I guess what I was trying to get at is, are these figures accurate in that there are so many days that children, 10 months is a long time, it's 180 days. So,
Right.
And as I look at that, I just wanted to make sure that's been calculated and we don't come up short.
No, it's a reasonable question. Again, I think it's based on what our actual experience with running these programs and counting the number of days that we can count on being paid, the number of months.
And just follow up on what you just said, I'm assuming therefore that the vacation week programs and the summer programs are going to be administered as they have been in the past out of the current revolving funds, and this new program, which will be out of the new revolving fund, is an entirely separate piece.
That is what we are calling.
Okay.
I had 3 questions that I can only remember 2 right this minute. Have you looked, I'm just curious about what an after-school program fees may be in the area. Does anybody know? Are these sort of comparable to what or are there after-school programs in other communities?
Yes. Do you want to go first?
Well, we primarily looked at what the fees are, and as I believe that Maria did speak to, there are some differences within the current 5 after-school programs, so we have looked at that and gone from there.
Okay.
And one of the primary evaluators recommended that the fee from what it was could go up, and I think, potentially could go up further, but right now, again, we'll start here and see where we may go in the future, depending on the programming and the interest.
All right. Second question is, Ella says he has has fundraised for the after-school programs.
Yes.
So is that money then going to go into the revolving fund, and will that continue the fundraising?
We have fundraised for the after-school program and have had many generous contributions from the community. And this particular last fundraising program, what we were requesting for after-school programs, and we took that in a more general respect. We certainly were looking at this kind of a program. We were also considering some of the other activities that we have, an art class after school to be an after-school program. So we were in that fundraising campaign, looking for funds that would support all of the after-school programs in a general manner. Going forward, we may have a more targeted approach to look at something very specific to these 3 programs.
And my third question, if I remember, this is to be a revolving fund. Is it going to be a revolving fund that town meeting establishes once and then that's it? Or is it going to be the kind where town meeting is gonna have to revote it every year?
It will be revoted every year. It's under Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half.
It's a real statute.
It is.
I remember when we were looking at a revolving fund for library fines.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
That was that kind of
Yes.
Right.
revolving fund, and the trustees decided not to pursue it, but,
So this will be a revolving fund that must be reauthorized every year. There are requirements in this statute about documenting to town meeting what's been taken in, what's been spent. Money that is taken in and not spent remains in the revolving fund as long as town meeting continues to reauthorize it. If at some point town meeting didn't reauthorize it, the money would revert to the general fund.
then, one more thing we'll have to write about for the finance committee report to town meeting. Since the warrant is already closed for the annual town meeting, is there a plan to have a special town meeting to establish this?
We've consulted with town council on this issue, and his recommendation is that we make this a part of the motion on the community services budget.
Yes. Did you consult with the moderator?
Have not spoken yet to the moderator, but will speak to the moderator to make sure that he's in agreement with that, and we'll do that before for the select board next week.
But I think the big picture on this is, even though it's a revolving fund, it will be part of the budget process each year because of that requirement of this type of revolving fund, that the not to exceed spending amount be part of the motion each year. So that will be part of this year's motion, but it'll be an annual thing. It won't be back in 2012, town meeting created a revolving fund and that was the last you ever heard of it.
I might want to add, we always put at the bottom of the agenda topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance, and this happens to be legitimately one of them, because I only heard this afternoon that town council had advised that it can be done through the budget motions, through the budget article. So if we end up agreeing to the enlargement of the community services budget for this purpose, then I would place on the agenda tonight the unanticipated item, which is agreement to recommend and make a motion to establish the revolving fund. Yes, Fairly.
I'm looking on the first page and you have an hourly wage of $2.50 for work study. Is there something missing there, or one in front of it, or?
Well, the town has the very good fortune of, because the work study program is a federal program, that for the town departments, we only pay a 25% portion of whatever it is we're paying students.
Well, this is a very exciting program. I would like to see it involve all children. Our grandchildren are in a school that has enrichment every night after school, and everybody stays until 4:45 from 3 o'clock. And it's wonderful. There's art, there's music, there's academics, and but theirs is free. So unfortunately ours cannot be, but I think this is exciting.
Are there other questions from the committee? Or other comments that any of our guests would like to make at this point? As if not, I think that we probably need 3 motions, and we need guidance from... Yes.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
This is a funding. The $40,000 would come out of reserves.
Estimated FY13 revenue.
Oh, okay, right.
Last week, we were presented with a budget report that was dated April 5th that was presented also earlier that day to the budget coordinating group, and it, as you recall, provided the calculations that indicated that we can do this without going into free cash farther than we had anticipated. And also note that we are going to have to reconsider this question as we go along about the free cash, because in light of what we heard earlier this evening, our commitment was to the school budget, not to our source of funds, whether it comes out of anticipated additional state revenues or remains out of free cash is something that we have to decide. It's neutral to the schools because they want the money, not the.
Yeah, my recommendation, particularly given what we're hearing about the status of the state budget, they're still relatively early in their process, and so for purposes of town meeting, my advice is to use the free cash as a source. And it's quite conceivable that if and when the state aid is higher than the governor's estimate, that will be a direct replenishment of the free cash over the course of the coming year.
So what we need from Sandy is 3 motions. The 2 we held off on last week. The community services motion that would encompass the amount necessary to support this program, and I'll leave it to the committee as if they would offer that motion. The second is that I asked them to let us know if it would change, if this program would change the general government amount, and so we did not go to the general government amount. And the third vote is that I would request that somebody consider whether they would make a motion to establish an additional revolving fund and as a finance committee motion under the budget article. And I think that those would be the motions that we need. Is that correct?
I think that's right.
So Sandy,
so the sheet that I handed out last week, you probably don't still have it with you, but many of you are very well organized. You may have it in a notebook. The number for community services is $1,692,882.
Can you repeat that, please?
1,692,882. 882.
That's what it was last week?
Yes,
That is
last week she
Yep,
did
that's what it was
that.
last week.
It was shown on last week's sheet, but we didn't vote it because we didn't want to vote it until we heard the presentation this evening. Okay.
I move that we recommend a community services budget of $1,692,882.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion that has been made by Kay, seconded by Doug. Any further discussion on the motion? Plenty of discussion in the program, so there's nothing further. Maybe I'll just note this for the minutes. Mr. Slaughter normally, if it's a school budget item, abstains. Prior to the meeting, we had a discussion with Mr. Fuller and all agreed that this is not a school budget motion because it's a community services budget motion, and therefore I have determined as chair that it's appropriate if he wishes to vote. So with that, we have 5 members of the committee present. All in favor indicate by raising hands. So we have 5 in favor, so it's 5-0 with 2 members absent. General government.
The general government, the question last week came up as to whether the general government number had to be different because these 3 employees will have benefits, and traditionally or generally we budget benefits within general government. However, because of the nature of this revolving fund, the revolving fund legislation says if you, so the revolving fund law says that if you pay salaries out of a revolving fund for full-time employees, you have to pay the associated benefits out of the revolving fund. So the general government budget does not need to change, and so I would recommend a general government number of $6,088,418. That's 6088418.
Is there a motion? Doug,
I move to recommend a general government budget of $6,088,418.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll take Mary Lou as the seconder. And no further discussion? Any further discussion? None. All in favor indicate by raising hands. So again, it's 5-0, 2 members absent. And then the third request, and I don't know if, did you want to give the statutory section or to be a part of the motion?
Yes. So this would be to establish a revolving fund under the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2.
So moved.
Section what?
53E and 1/2.
53.5, like?
No, 53, large capital E, and then 1/2.
Oh my goodness. All right.
In the amount, with the authorized expenditure limit of $400,000 to be expended under the direction of the LSSE director for the purpose of providing subsidies to the after-school program.
So moved.
Okay.
Did we get that down right?
I'll take that in a second, but there's been a motion that has been made by Mary Lou and seconded by Doug. And I've got most of it established. A revolving fund under pursuant to Chapter 44, Section 53E1/2, to authorize the expenditure with a limit of $400,000 to be expended under the direction of the LSSE director for the purpose of program subsidies. How did you word that?
Program subsidies is fine.
Because they're providing subsidies for after-school programs.
Provide subsidies for the after-school program.
You're doing minutes tonight, Kay?
No, Janice is.
Okay.
So maybe we can get Janice to read it back.
You did a good job. Would you want me to read it again?
Yes.
To establish, well, I didn't get the first part, but I'll make it up. To establish a revolving fund under Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2, to authorize the expenditure with a limit of $400,000 to be expended under the direction of the LSSC director for the purpose of providing subsidies for after-school programs.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor, it's been made and seconded, and we've discussed it substantially. I don't know if there's any additional discussion on it. Okay.
The motion is to recommend.
Yeah.
The establishment.
Yes, and the anticipation is that some lucky member of the committee could give the job to Bob Zoll.
Exactly. One of the absent members usually gets of all the votes, right?
We'll make the motion and explain the motion, but a member of this committee will move that, and so any further discussion? If not, I'll take a vote on the motion. All in favor indicate by raising hands. It's 5-0 again with 2 members absent. So I think that concludes all of this particular portion of the business. We thank all of you for being here with us, and and the information you provided is a very exciting program. I agree with you. As I've keep hearing more and more about it, I think I've been more enthusiastic, and I heard that from Mary Lou also. So thank you.
I just asked, the school committee has discussed this.
We've been over at school committee meetings, yes.
Last week they went over the proposal.
It is exciting.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the one other budget item that we need to do, which is a matter that maybe I'll ask Sandy to explain, is we actually need to reconsider the library budget. And I don't know.
Glad to explain. As you know, the library budget is approved by town meeting in two parts. One is the overall budget, total expenditures, and the other is the appropriation of town tax dollars for support of the library. And the library director and trustees recommended a budget back in February at the numbers that you voted a couple of weeks ago. In the interim, the library director, whom you all know is new, decided to look at the budget for FY14 and see what she thought was really needed to run the library. And she decided that she wanted to adjust the total expenditure amount to a different number. And she's identified different sources, including some gift accounts that have balances that have been unexpended during this year, in which she intends to apply to FY13. She's discussed this with the trustees, although they haven't formally voted on it. But after she returned this spreadsheet to us, which Maria Rocca uses as part of the Finance Committee report, she sent it out to Sharon and said, just fill in the numbers so everything balances. And she filled in the numbers, and it didn't balance. And Janice, I have to say, was the first one to pick that up, so I have to give her full credit for her sharp eye. And so we had several conversations with the library director, and with me and John, and Andy got involved, and we went round and round and looked at the old memorandum of understanding between the library and trustees and the select board from 1984. I read the 1919 original statute that set up the trust for the library, and then there was a subsequent amendment to that. So it was a great history lesson. The bottom line is that the library director is recommending a budget of $2,272,830, which is on this sheet. The amount of town support is unchanged. The amount of anticipated state aid and endowment draw are all unchanged. What really changes is the amount that she's counting on for next year from gifts and donations. And it is my recommendation that we go along and recommend this number to town meeting, in as much as it is the library director's strong feeling that this is a realistic assessment of what she's likely to spend and what she needs to spend in the coming year to run the library. Traditionally, the monies that have come in from gifts and donations have not been under, they're not booked on the town books or anything, they're booked within the library. And so if they spend more or less than what they originally estimated, that's really always been on them. And I will give the library director credit for trying to present a fully accurate estimate of what she anticipates is going to come in from these sources and what they're likely to spend. So I do think it's probably a more transparent budget, and as I say, she thinks this is what they really are going to spend, what they need to spend to maintain their current level of services. We did have a lot of conversations about whether this is sustainable, and are they making sure they're not dipping into one-time funds and so forth. And I think what she said is that, like anything with the library, fundraising is a big, important part of what they do, and she and the trustees realize that they're going to have to live up to their goals here. And I think that's pretty much it. So what I think the committee needs to do, if it's your pleasure, is to reconsider the vote on the library appropriation from before and substitute these new numbers in the Finance Committee report.
Actually, because you really vote the library budget bottom line and the town appropriation does not change.
That's correct.
Just the budget, and because of other things that are happening. The memorandum of understanding does provide that the library budget should be approved by town meeting, and since this is an amendment that is being made before town meeting takes place, it led to some discussion. And I made the suggestion that it would probably be fine if the trustees were able to approve it before town meeting, even though that can't take place before we approve it. And they do have it scheduled on their agenda for the, I think, 27th. So they do anticipate, and I think it's going to be a problem whether we want to indicate in our report that this is based upon a budget that has not been approved, but we understand will be discussed and acted upon by the trustees on the 27th, and just include that sentence in our report. I think that it would be fine. Okay.
I think it would be fine too. If you remember 2 years ago, we went to town meeting voted the library budget before they even voted their own budget.
This is progress.
I think there's precedent for it. I mean, we recommended the town appropriation, and we said they anticipated it would be this budget, but they haven't voted it yet. And so if they have voted by then, or if they vote a different budget, we can just note it. But it's the town appropriation that counts in my.
Well, just to be clear, within the categories listed within the memorandum, the trustees can't overexpend, and those categories are the town contribution, the endowment draw, and state aid. It does not speak to donations.
Right.
And this number does include donations, but just in terms of what the legal impact of the numbers as they're voted.
Doug.
I move that we reconsider our vote of the library budget and tax support for the library.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion by Doug, seconded by Mary Lou. This is a motion to reconsider a vote previously taken. And is there further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by raising hands. So it's 5-0 with 2 members absent. Now we are without a library budget, so we need a motion to get us back to a library budget. Okay.
I move that we recommend a library budget of $2,272,830 with town general fund support of $1,690,789.
Second.
It was motion made by Kate,
Town
Sec-
appropriation of that.
seconded by Doug. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by raising hands. So that's 5-0, 2 members absent. And I think that at that point we've finished all the pieces of the FY 2013 budget that was sublisted, other than if there's a wish to have any further discussion. Mr. Sharma. Just say that there are some handouts that you're receiving for what happened before. I was just trying to point out that there was a very good news report at the beginning because it's very preliminary that the House Ways and Means Committee has voted a budget that is very good news for us because it was a significant increase in our unrestricted government aid if it's passed by the House. If it is then recommended by the Senate Ways and Means Committee and passed by the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and if the governor signs it. So there's a number of steps that all have to take place.
We'll cheer on every step of the way.
Yes, and I just wanted, we just got a report on it at the beginning of the meeting, and I said that we would come back to it as we got a little bit farther along. And I think that when the town manager was here, he left a few minutes ago, and he made a recommendation, which I think is along the lines that seems to make sense, which is that we really don't know yet that this is really going to happen, and that we need to be very cautious in our approach, and it's probably not appropriate to expend or to recommend or to support or to encourage the expenditure of these funds at this tenuous a time. And that last year the process was that the state didn't put this money into the original budget, but it was money that was available, we knew of, by the fall special town meeting. I took then the opportunity to ask Sandy to suggest if there was any appropriate language that we might want to add to that introductory section of the town meeting report that I had circulated to you beforehand, and he suggested a couple of sentences that fit in the appropriate places. One is the tentative nature. We will not know final state aid figures until the end of the state budget process in late June or early July. And then the next sentence to add to it, the next sentence was, would then read, the responsible assumption is level funding for state aid. It is the state aid amount used in this budget. If these figures change, we would propose taking up those changes at the fall town meeting as we did in November 2011. I think that that would be consistent with all of our votes previously taken, does not require a vote of the committee, because unless we're going to change the budget, it's really a question of explaining. And I think that and it is what I would recommend to be our approach to dealing with this. So I thank Sandy for drafting, and if that's agreeable, then I would just go ahead. Okay.
I think it's very wise to do that. And you know, if we do get an extra amount of money, that we need to build reserves, and we need to start funding the other post-employment benefit trust fund. So we need to do that anyway, and it would be good if we get additional state aid to help us start doing that.
Well, I second that. Is there going to be pressure to spend the money? Where is it going to come from?
Well, we know that there will be a motion that will be made to amend the community services budget to add for the purpose of funding outside human service agencies that provide services within the town. We already heard the presentation of that as a separate warrant article, and it could come up again as a separate warrant article or be dismissed at that point. But we know, we heard the presenter that night say that, and she has repeated the other fairly recently, that she intends to make it as a motion to amend. So
Is the $66,000?
yes, I think that's what it was.
Yes.
So we do know we have that one. We don't know if there will be any others, and so that it is something that we need to be aware of. I did say something that all of you who were here, I'm sure, understood. Remember, we had voted to take from free cash the amount of $218,200 to support, in order for the elementary schools to be funded at what we determined to be an adequate level. And at the time we had heard originally about the need to do so, the statement that we had made as a committee, the understanding, which was not a motion, so it was not something that has the force of a motion, but it was an understanding of the committee that I confirmed that we would be prepared to take up to $218,200 out of free cash in order to assure that schools had the ability to fund the schools in an adequate manner, and that was the sense of the committee. If you take that to the next step, it would be logical for this committee to consider whether that should have stayed in free cash. The town manager's recommendation a few minutes ago was that because this is so hypothetical, that we go ahead and make a recommendation that it be funded from free cash originally, and then if it is not otherwise budgeted, it will just automatically come back into free cash. So I think that it's good that we make it clear what it is that's happening, but that's kind of where we are if we take with no action whatsoever. So there really is no need for action, but I felt it was important that this committee be, discuss it or be aware of it. So
Yeah, so I think the free cash article has been deferred until town meeting. I don't think we voted. My notes say we didn't vote on it. I just want to make sure.
that's correct, because obviously if anything else comes up in the nature of an amendment that amends up or down, we always wait, and we always have a meeting the night when we anticipate Articles 22 and 23 comes forward immediately prior to the town meeting session, and it's usually a pretty quick vote, because by then it's a number that the finance director has figured out what needs to come out of free cash to make it all balance, and most of us are pretty well aware of what that is anyway. So that's kind of where we leave it. So if there's nothing further, I think we can close out the discussion of the 2013 budget for this evening. And actually that comes up under under number 4 on the agenda. So we'll just stick on the agenda as we go forward. The town meeting warrant articles, the other things that are still to be heard are the zoning articles that will be presented to us, and I did have a discussion with the chair of the bylaws subcommittee, Mr. O'Keefe, of the planning board, and it's anticipated that he and Mr. Tucker will both be at our meeting in, I think, next week. And so one of the things that I just put on there is that if there is specific information that you know that you want, I have talked to a number of you individually, and those I've been able to reach who've spent some time sharing your thoughts with me. It was very helpful. I did share information without going into who took what position, but just generally to use it as guidance of giving Mr. O'Keefe some suggestions of things that the committee might want to hear. I told him I couldn't anticipate everything the committee would want to hear, but I take that step. If there's anything that you want to identify and you want either Sandy or me to convey to either Mr. O'Keefe, I'm going with Mr. because we have two Jonathans coming then, Mr. O'Keefe or Mr. Tucker, please offer them. And as I'm doing that, the other thing I would say is that when I sent out the executive summary for the Finance Committee report, I highlighted some sentences that refer to zoning, and these were not newly written. They in fact were verbatim from the prior year, but they had to do with zoning and our...
The copy I sent you, I think I unhighlighted that.
Oh, you unhighlighted it, so it's not in...
Mine came highlighted.
Yeah, there's a subsequent version that is not. So anyway, that has been, it was a statement last year of the operating philosophy of the committee in considering zoning, and therefore, I think I just wanted to point it out in case anybody felt uncomfortable and wanted to raise that for the whole committee.
I just have one suggestion for it. I don't have any problem with it because we can choose to vote or not vote for it, but I think the word responsible growth, just take responsible out, just considers growth as part, because then we can decide here if we think it's responsible. I think you get into, well, what do you consider responsible growth? How do you define that? I think it's easier just to have the statement without responsible, just say considers growth as part of fiscal policy, and then we can decide, if we think it's not, if there's no impact on the town, financial impact or whatever. But I think that responsible is could be something people could argue with us about.
Well, I think all of this is something people could argue with us about.
Probably.
And it's something that we can argue with ourselves about.
Right.
Because deciding what's responsible and what's not that's the crux of the matter when we're debating things. But I think otherwise, if you just leave it as growth, that could be just unregulated growth for growth's sake. And I don't think that's what we meant by it last year. And I don't think it's generally what we mean by it.
Janice?
Could you just read those sentences?
Yeah, you have them highlighted, so...
Okay. The Community Choices Facilitation Committee report from 2009 concluded that new development was part of the essential strategy for long-term financial stability for the town. For that reason, the Finance Committee considers responsible growth as part of the fiscal policy when it considers whether to support articles about development and zoning.
Yeah, I read it, but
Okay.
I don't remember it verbatim.
Yeah, go ahead.
we still, I mean, it could be responsible growth, but we still don't necessarily know what the advantages or disadvantages, the fiscal advantages or disadvantages will be. And I hope when these people come next week, they will be able to share some of that information with us. I know we've talked about asking them to bring it and come, but that was part of my problem last year.
That's kind of what I conveyed in my conversation that I had with Mr. O'Keefe. I don't, I had not had a conversation with Jonathan Tucker about it.
I have spoken with them and tried to convey the concerns the committee has, and I think he will try to answer those as best he can. It's not a precise formula necessarily, but well, I'll let him speak to it when he speaks.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit more, but Enron?
Well, just I don't know if we are how much we want to beat this one, but this being the finance committee, the responsibility we care about is financial responsibility. There could be other kinds of responsibilities, like social responsibility. There could be, all other kinds. So I suspect as something for you to consider is, we say financially responsible growth. Let the others decide whether it's socially responsible or it's responsible in other ways or not. But we are really concerned about whether it's financially responsible. That kind of addresses the issue about, puts the onus a little bit back on us in the sense that we need to determine whether it is financially responsible. And if we're not able to determine whether it's financially responsible, then that says something about it.
No, I think that's actually a good addition.
It's a good idea, yeah.
Yeah, I will add that word prior, so thank you. When I talked with Mr. O'Keefe, I did convey to him that there was a desire to get at least an indication of whether and to what extent, how likely new growth is. I mean, the problem that he was pointing out, and I had two conversations with him, and the first conversation was that we know that some types of zoning makes it possible for a developer to propose to do something. We don't know if a developer will propose to do something that will create that new growth potential. And when I came back to the second conversation, I said, I think I understood the point you made, but what the committee would really like to hear is a little bit more why you think that this particular zoning change is at least likely to draw in the kind of financially beneficial development. Because if it's just development, but it's not going to have a it's not going to add to new growth, then that's a distinction that we need to hear about. Yes.
Or if the zoning may just, the zoning change may just make the development that happens there different from development that would happen otherwise.
I did have that part of the conversation with him. It's a very tricky question because there are a whole bunch of sub-pieces in there. If you have something that would allow for commercial development now, and this is just different kinds of commercial development, unless it's going to be more likely to draw in commercial development that will be more substantial, it would not really have a financial impact. The other thing that I gave him, and this was again based upon conversations that I was able to have with some members of the committee individually, was that if it was for a large number of housing, for example, that would likely draw in a large number of children into the schools, or another population that would have known costs for town services, that would also be financially important information for the committee to consider. So those are the kinds of examples, but I couldn't get more specific. It is very difficult to do that interact.
Is there a capability in the planning department to be able to do back of the envelope numbers like that? Or is it something, because sometimes, people just have different skills and they can be very, very good at what they're doing, and some other skills they just may not be there, that's not how they think.
I think that's a fair question to ask them next week.
My thought is that from at least from our point of view, that's a pretty significant issue and piece of information that can help us make informed decisions and perhaps even suggestions. Because the same thing can be financed in different ways, and in one way it can be not viable, the other way it can be very viable. So if they don't have those kinds of skills, and I'm not assuming that they don't, then is there something you can do to help them acquire some kind of a help in accomplishing those kinds of numbers?
Yeah, I struggle with that a little bit, and I get the reason behind it, but the difficulty I have is, it gets back to an earlier point that sort of Keith made, which is it makes things possible. And so if you change zoning so that it makes certain things possible, for example, the construction's going on next to the parking garage is possible because we changed the zoning to allow really taller buildings than downtown. That made that possible, but there was no guarantee when we made the zoning change that would happen. Now, and so not only do we have to then, so it gets, while I think you can quantify it, I think that it's the difficulty in quantifying it in a conversation at town meeting is that then people will have an expectation, which is not necessarily going to happen, or not going to happen in any short time period that would be where people might consider the sort of revenue from that, new growth. So I think that's the danger of quantifying it too specifically in some ways. But I think there's times we will hear, and we have heard certainly zoning articles where what it allows or disallows sometimes moves us in a direction that has more positives than negatives, and the size of that number is not necessarily knowable, or not well knowable, or certainly the time frame within which it would happen is not knowable. But and there's plenty of things that also don't have there's no way to quantify them. So if a certain thing creates or constrains things such that it keeps a certain aesthetic, some zoning that involves aesthetic sort of things. Well, how do you place a value on that? Those are hard to do. Does it sustain property values? Does it inhibit property values because of the constraints on construction, because of those kind of limitations or whatever? So those are the ones where I struggle a lot more with. I think we generally struggle a lot more with, but there are some that are much more clear cut. But again, I worry about quantifying just because I think it creates expectations around revenue that are hard to put a timeline on.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I kind of get that. I think my sense is there has to be some mechanism to bring some discipline to the thinking. I think quantification is not the only way to bring discipline to the thinking, but it's perhaps a little bit more, tangible way to. Otherwise, you can spin. I mean, in theory, a story can be told in many different ways, and there can be a lot of spin. So if it is not, if you don't want to quantify, then what is the other way in which you can bring discipline to the thinking, and which is evident to somebody like us? So if you cannot quantify aesthetics, then it's outside the purview of finance committee making any kind of having an opinion about it. can't. So so there are many things that can be quantified, but I would argue that for those things we don't have a say. We don't have an opinion.
So I think the example that you gave is a good one, Doug, because if you go back to increasing the height limit in downtown that enabled that building to be built that's being built now adjacent to Bulkwood parking. I suppose that if the old height limit had been 2 stories back there, I don't remember what it was now, and it has gone to 4 stories, the calculation could be made that that additional building space would result in an approximate additional value of X, which would have an additional tax value of Y. It doesn't mean that a proposal will come in to allow that higher level to be built. We cannot know that. They cannot know that, and I think that's where the hesitation comes in. But I think that there is sort of this middle piece on that one as an example. I will send an email just as a reminder, and I will let them know we had the discussion and invite them to tune in on Amherst Media so that they can see the discussion from tonight if they wish.
And perhaps our discussion from last week about the local historic district might be informative for them, because that was a case in which we were trying to decide what the economic impact might be, and came out deciding that it wasn't clear. It's positives and negatives, and there's some of the same criteria that you might see in a zoning amendment.
Yeah. Because that one, of course, for the most part, had to do more with design, but there were some other factors that we did talk about. The other 2 articles that we have to get back to are Articles 29 and 30, which are 2 petition articles, one having to do with the banking, and Article 29 having to do with the Secure Communities program. And I do have to let the petitioners know that we will intend to take them out and vote. I'm not going to indicate that it is our intent to, or our request even, to have an additional presentation from the petitioners, but I think that it's fair that they know that they both requested to know when it would be coming up on an agenda, and I will let them know. The question is whether there's any other information that's available. I have to get clarification from the town manager as to whether any legal opinion that might be provided by town council can be provided to the finance committee, and whether there's any additional information from the police chief about along the things that we posed to him at the last time that he was at one of our meetings. I don't know if there's anything else that you can think of that will help you to make a decision next week on that one.
I will try to get the minutes out, but there's a considerable amount of money involved with that in terms of grants we've received, and the fact that the department has to sign off that they're going to give this information to the appropriate bodies. So I think you need to have that to see, because I think there is possible financial impact.
Yeah, there is, and that was the question I think for the police chief, because we weren't sure whether, and he wasn't clear as to how certain or how likely it is that grants might be lost under the circumstances of taking that action. We don't know that there was any direct qualification for grants tied specifically to providing the information, and that's what we had asked him to just see if he could determine.
Excuse me, I thought he, at least I will have this in my minutes, I thought he said that they have to sign off as to abiding by the regulations of the grant or the restrictions of the grant. And while he believed that grants in place would not be affected, grants in the future probably would be. If they have that restriction in it, then they have to sign that they abide by what it says.
They,
By the contract.
they
It's
do
a
have to
contract.
sign a contract.
Right.
I think what he said was, it's very hard to know what would happen in the future. Clearly, we have to abide by whatever contract we sign. There are some communities that have notified the FBI of their similar resolutions, and they've got notifications. Thank you for letting us know. What you don't know is the next time you apply for the grant, and you don't get the grant, whether it was because,
Right.
and I think as he pointed out, they're probably not going to tell you.
Correct.
So, I think it's a risk, but it's getting back to quantifying things. How do you know, how can you quantify the risk of that? It's a lot of money, and so if you, and it supports some very important programs. I don't think there's any answer that the police chief's going to be able to get between now and next Thursday, unless he comes up with something that so far hasn't been able to, that's going to definitively say to us, if we vote this one way or the other, we are or not going to get grants. It may increase the risk that we don't get grants, I think is the most clear thing that we can say.
Yeah, what we did ask him was a narrower question. It is kind of what we're getting at. If, I think it has to actually do with the state justice programs, not the federal justice programs, but if there was a requirement within the grants that we get from the Commonwealth that specifically would be violated by passing this, and it's a known grant condition, that it would be good to know. And he said that Captain Gunderson is the one who oversees the grants in the department, and he would pose that question to her. So that was the one. That was the one piece that I would just see if there's an inquiry on. On Article 30, we had a pretty good present. Yes, okay.
Back on that article, I really do think it's important to get an opinion from town council, if we can get it, about whether this is even a legal motion for town meeting or legal bylaw to establish, because of course all bylaws that are proposed, but they're passed by town meeting, have to go by the Attorney General.
Right.
And if the Attorney General says it's okay, fine, but are we going to get ourselves in legal trouble if we pass a bylaw like this? And that could be an added expense.
If the town manager has asked for an opinion, which I believe he may have, from town council, and town council gives an opinion, it is an attorney privileged document, and only the town manager can waive the privilege. And so that's why I mentioned earlier, it's really up to the town manager to decide whether that can be made available. And so I just kind of have to leave it at that. Which then gets us on to Article 30. We had a very good presentation from the treasurer and the list of accounts. I don't know that there's anything else that is available to us or that we can receive. And so, but if there are additional questions that you think of, you can either send a note to Sandy or send a note to me, and we will see what we can do to get those questions answered before we take this up again. But we will have to make a determination as to how to proceed, which could be I mean, there is financial impact, more likely, but we could decide there is no financial impact, or we could decide there is financial impact, make a recommendation, or we could decide that it's appropriate to make some additional kind of procedural motion, including a motion to refer back to this committee so that we can spend more time with it as we look at the investment policy. So those are the options that will be available to us next week. Yes.
At the time, the petitioner had suggested that he was amenable to potentially altering the motion a little bit. Have we heard anything about whether he's gotten more concrete in some of those potential changes that he kind of was contemplating that as he sat here with us that evening with the treasurer, so it was a bit ad hoc. So I don't want to,
He said something to me. He said something to me again subsequent to the motion, but I will ask him when I let him know about this that whether he has a new motion.
Okay. Because that might influence our thinking as well. Is all I was thinking about is.
Yeah.
And if he hasn't made his mind up, then he hasn't made his mind up. So we go.
Well, he did say to me the other night, I did see him after the warrant review meeting, and he did still speak in those terms that he's intending to do that. So it hasn't changed. So that takes care of item number 2, which gets us onto the development of the report to town meeting, and then the order for the motions on the budget articles at town meeting, which are the next 2 items. So Sandy has a copy of the sheet with the assignments of responsibility. And
This one.
Just so you know what this means, as you develop your drafts, they go to Andy and Kay. So the far left columns are whether Kay and then Andy has reviewed them. The next column is who on the committee is assigned to write the next is just what vote the committee has taken, the amount of the article, and then the next one is me, that's SMP, whether I have finished reviewing it, and then way over on the far right is once I've reviewed it, I have to keep track of whether I've emailed it to Maria Rocca so that she then does the cutting and pasting and formatting to put it into the final report document. So if you see your initial and it doesn't say to Maria, then
some of them are stuck with me, and I will, they are getting done. I've done things not been going fabulously for me, getting things done on a timely basis this time, and that I am working through them.
Can I just make
Yes.
one little point? We all have a tendency to double space after a period. I was taught that in typing
Double.
class. Remember typing?
oh yeah.
Well, it apparently throws the formatting off. So if you can try to remember, don't double space after a period.
Really? Because I've been changing.
Oh, no.
You have to talk to Ms. Rocca about
Talk to
that.
Maria.
Oh, okay. Boy, I don't want to get in trouble with Maria, that's for sure.
No, it's Maria
we
goes
ran
and
into
takes them
that.
out.
Yeah, she goes and takes them all out.
Well, I'm certainly glad I've created a lot of extra work.
Maybe if I may.
Yes.
A couple things. On articles number 9 and 10, although Kate's written those up for anything, thanks very much. I'm happy to present those to town meeting, and I think probably almost 4 weeks ago I may have volunteered for those. So if we want to sort of under finance committee assignment put my initials next to Kay's for those, I'm happy to do those on 9 and 10.
Those have already been sent.
They've been sent off, I know that, but I'm just saying,
They'll
presenting.
present them
Sorry, yes.
at the meeting, so. I think there's one other that has a question mark 17 on buildings and facilities, that should have my initials as well,
Okay, good.
so.
So, if you've gotten it off to K and you know you've gotten it off to K and your initials aren't there, you know it's not your fault and you know to bug us. And if it said my initial isn't there, you know to bug me. But if it hasn't, if you know you haven't sent it off, then this is
Then we'll bug you.
It will bug you. So,
Yeah, I need to be bugged, but I have, thank you for the email back, so this is the first time I'm doing it, so I can get any help. I can talk to you after the middle.
So the question of the order, we used to have a standard order that we always presented it at. They were, what we would always do is that when we got to Article 12, have the schools and the library be last, and that we would have the municipal functions first, and we had a standard order for the 5 municipal functions, and then we would do debt service and the 4 enterprise funds. Was essentially how it would go, and the difficulty, which was, I shouldn't say difficulty, but there were some people in town meeting who felt that it created a difficulty for the people who were wanting to amend later budgets because prior budgets had already been fully funded, and they thought that it would be better to randomize at least the municipal functions for the 5 operating functions, and that was a request that was made through the town meeting coordinating committee. For the last 2 years, we have in fact done that. And so when we get into order, I guess that there's several questions that come up, and one is, should we randomize on those 5 functions? The second is, if we randomize, then how do we address a request that has been made by the Chief Nelson of the Fire Department that we not have public safety during the first week because he will be out of town.
I've heard from him a couple of days ago, and he is now not going to be out of town, so that is no longer an issue.
Okay, then that one's taken back. And the third one was whether we wanted to consider the schools and the libraries earlier. And the reason that I put that forward for your consideration is, and I had this discussion actually with Rick Hood previously, and I'm sorry, he's not here now to speak for himself since he was here earlier, but Rick pointed out that every year we put schools at the end, and then the superintendent has to be there for numerous nights because it's never certain which night the school budgets will come forward. And that last year there were 3 or 4 nights that she had to be in the building in case it came up that evening, and that he thought that that it's a hardship to ask her to do that every year, and maybe we could be kind and put the schools at the top of the list first, and that would assure that they would come up on the first night of budget discussion and create a higher degree of predictability. The same thing actually happened last year for the libraries, because there was a lot of confusion about when the acting director, who was at that point the one in charge, could be there, and then we ended up having a night which couldn't be there anyway, and it got very confusing. So there is some merit to the suggestion of switching that order. So I turn all that over to you for your thoughts. Okay, and then Doug.
Doug has him up first.
Okay, Doug, and then Caleb.
I mean, you can make that argument for all the directors in some respects. I mean, around public works and public safety, and they're all coming in their evening after working during the day to be at these things. So I think in some ways, I think the concession to make for the schools would be to keep both of those together. Whether we do them early or not is not, to my mind, necessarily as important, or I mean, that's my thinking about those, is that most of them have a director that comes and at least answers questions. Often have to come more than one night because it's not an exact science about how quickly town meeting will go through its work. Usually the most sure is whatever's first on the budget. So my suggestion would be at least I would keep the enterprise funds at the end, because I think that they're sort of self-contained in a way. But the other budget components, I think we can jumble them up and be fine.
First, there could be an argument to be made to put the public works and the enterprise funds together.
Well, that's true too.
This is Mr. Mooring who has to speak
That's
to all of
absolutely
that.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I also want to point out that they may all want to come back for the capital budget,
Oh, that's true.
because the schools, the library, and the town departments all have an interest in that. So it's kind of hard to arrange our order of presentation so that the fewest people have to hang around night after night, because we don't know what town meeting, how fast town meeting is going to go through these things. We just don't know. I sympathize with the school department and the library trustees and the superintendent and the library director having to wait around. I don't really know how to get around that by scheduling. That somebody's going to have to wait around.
I think that the argument would be that the schools tend to move more quickly, and the library tends to move more quickly. Where we get bogged down more frequently is in other sections of the budget. So it is a little bit more predictable, and I think that what Mr. Hood said wasn't that we do this every year, but that out of fairness that we consider it in some years. It was sort of a pitch that of not always going in the same order. And I think that's the reason why. Yes.
Well, I think last year was exceptional in that one of their own chairs asked to separate them, and because the person wouldn't be there. So we split region in Amherst, and then wasn't there a special night for something too that came up? So I think it was unusual, because I think in previous years things have moved along. They may have had to wait, but not. Last year was a disaster, I think, for the library and the schools, because they waited and waited, and things went just longer than anticipated.
Well, there is another thing that you just raised, and that is, since Article 11 is the regional school assessment and Article 12 is the operating budget, if you're going to have the schools all together in one chunk you would say, well, let's take them first so that it comes immediately after the regional assessment method.
I'm not sure if anyone was there for that. I think only Rick was there, and I spoke to it. And I'm not sure they even show up for the capital budget. I think that's kind of they do.
No,
I don't think they do.
You.
That's a given. But I do I think the enterprise funds with Mooring are important, because he does come.
Yes.
But the schools, I would agree with Doug to keep them both together. And it should be the same night, so that they don't wind up being the end on one night and the beginning on the next, which is possible.
Which is difficult, possible to.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's an interesting point, because, and we had this discussion last year as this budget was going through, and I asked I was then the acting moderator, Mr. Pistrain, said, you know, since we're making the motions and the motions aren't on the warrant, it would seem that the Finance Committee chair can vary the order of the motions without requiring town meeting to vote them because it's not established in the warrant. And he said he agreed with that, and I said, well, in that circumstance, I'm not going to ask for a motion on the libraries until the first of the next session because the library director is not here. And he said, fine. So I can check with Mr. Gregg because I don't think that we're going to have an acting a night with the acting moderator this time. But if we can make that variation, then we could make a decision if if the schools, if it looks like we need to do so in order to get the schools together to vary the order, would require our maker of those motions, who's sitting here at the table, to have some flexibility, but we could do that.
But does the format of the order of the Finance Committee booklet kind of key people into what's coming next? And if it does, then your whatever plan, it may not work if they're looking at it.
We try, but it's not essential. Yes, Kay.
I can't remember a town meeting when we haven't decided to schedule something at 7:30 on a certain date, out of order.
Yeah.
And so that would throw whatever order we've got in our Finance Committee report off. But that seems to happen on a regular basis.
So shall we randomize the 5 functions? Yes, Kay.
Well, here's another thing to throw in, since we've all like to stay up later tonight. Randomizing, we can't have general government has to be the last of the 5 functional areas. Because if anything is changed in the functional areas, the general government amount will be changed.
I mean, if you cut back, then it's likely that there's fewer positions that's going to affect benefits and so forth.
Yeah. That's what we thought the last 2 years when we did this.
I think that is correct.
So, and another thing we thought about briefly a couple years ago was why just limit it to the 5 functional areas of the town budget? We could randomize the functional areas of the town government, including the enterprise funds for public works, and the 2 school budgets, and the library budget. So there's no reason that the library budget has to come after or before the school budget.
I think what we could randomize them, but do you really, are you talking about randomizing the library within the middle of the, so you could be making a motion on public safety, then a motion on the library, then a motion. Since those 5 functional areas stick together and it's only general government that is providing the benefits for 4 functional areas, say why that would make sense.
The town meeting coordinating committee said that they didn't think it was fair to some parts of the town budget that other parts get passed first. Well, the school budget is the biggest budget of anything, and that always gets passed last or close to the end. And if we put it first, then we will have committed 2/3 of the town's budget for the coming year. So, logically, if we're going to randomize, we should randomize everything. It seems, and it has always seemed odd to me, though we've done it, that we're just randomizing 4 things.
Well,
yes.
Why don't we randomize 3 things? the town portion, the library, and the schools, and keep those the articles that are appropriate to those three areas together. And that, I think that's easier to follow. You do the schools together, you can do it with the regional assessment, you can put it down there. The library by itself and the rest of the public works, public safety, conservation, put those together along with the enterprise funds. So I'd have just the three major budgets of the town together. The three budgets of the town together. Then you can kind of plan.
But then within the non-school, non-library, you still have to make a decision about what order those go in.
That's what they cared about, randomizing those.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know.
You should ask them again.
Why don't we just have a way that you can rotate them over the next, how many parts are there? Over the next so many years, okay? Police
15.
first this year, next year fire, next year
Then we did public,
conservation.
the public safety is all together.
Okay,
I guess this is what my thinking is on this. The enterprise funds make sense to have it in one block because they're not funded by the operating budget. They're funded within their own revenues. So we really want to separate out the things that are not supported by taxation.
okay.
And then we get into the question of public works and wanting to tie public works to the extent possible. So I think that is one principle that we have, and we want to keep the schools together, and we want to keep so we can do something along those lines of randomizing schools as a grouping, library services in town. I think it would probably be good to put public works and general government at the end, because public works then general government usually goes pretty quickly, and it can then pick up the enterprise funds. We can pick up the enterprise funds from there, and we randomize the other three. And we'll say that we'll do that from year to year. I think that would probably be okay, because I don't think that they're really worried about, I think they'll accept public works as being exceptional. Okay?
That sounds fine to me, but I just want to point out that one year, the general government took about 3/4 of an evening to discuss it.
What was the issue? I was trying to remember.
The issue was reducing it to I can't remember the issue now, but it had to do with reducing the general government budget. And we were opposed to that in town meeting, ultimately did that. So, but it took like more than half the night. So we never know what's going to be quick and what's not going to be quick.
We can't be certain. No, I would do public works, then general government, then the enterprise funds. That increases the chances that Mr. Mooring would be able to be there just for one evening.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing that we might want to say to them, that order is not something that we feel is determined in advance with certainty for the reasons stated. I will check with the moderator before saying this, but that if the moderator agrees that we can change, to make the point that we are going to exercise discretion to change the order because of presenter availability, or trying to assure that presenters who are involved with more than one budget have the chance to complete their presentations all in one night.
Where would debt service go on this list? Under, with the enterprise funds or above them, or, and then lump those together?
I actually think we could actually do debt service first, because that's one that we absolutely have to fund, and that might be the easiest way to deal with
Pay it
that.
one way or the other.
Right.
Okay, so
You're gonna
that,
pay your debts or you're not. Right.
okay.
We're either gonna be scofflaws or we're not. Right.
Do you think the first night would be community services? I mean, that with everything else we do to wind up with community services, that may be an area where there would be a lot of discussion.
Happened last year by random draw.
What will happen this year?
No, I mean, no, it was first
Oh, it was
last
first.
year.
Okay.
But it's also been at various places since we've randomized, because I don't think it was, last year wasn't the first year we randomized, correct?
No.
Right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to do this. It strikes me as having not proven out to be true, because as was demonstrated last year, town meeting was quite willing to amend the first budget and to increase it, and then didn't see any particular need to reduce any other budget thereafter in order to pay for what they did in the first budget, and it all ended up happening against our advice in requiring a free cash proposal. So I'm somewhat skeptical, but I'm willing to go along since they included the request, and that's what I will propose. And I will send you a copy of what I proposed to them. And unless there's anything else to be said. If there's nothing else to be said,
Do we have an order?
I'm going to come back at the next meeting. I'm going to tell them that's what we're going to do. I don't want to get bothered with drawing, but we did say we are going to have 2 drawings, and I will do this next week, and I will bring suitable pieces of paper that are so that we can do this at the very beginning of the meeting.
But by that time, the finance committee report had already been written.
That's true. Does somebody have a piece of paper that can?
I have lots of these.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and do that? You know what the 2 drawings are.
Well, why don't we just rotate them every year instead of doing the drawing? I think it would be more fair. The drawing could have the same department up every year as first or last or whatever by drawing.
Well, we could make that as a policy statement. If we make that as a policy statement now, saying that we'll take the last one first and then bump them back in order and just use the 3 that were there, that means community services would be second. For the people who are concerned about community services, it doesn't put them at the end, and it creates a new pattern.
I'd be okay with that.
But then we get to the other, do we need a random drawing about the libraries?
Why would they go to the, oh, I see, yes.
If you just said, I mean, that way you could do it so that you'd always say that whoever was last the year before of the ones that we are randomizing, which is now only 3, that we'll shuffle them so that the one that was last year goes first this year, and we bump it in that order.
So,
Okay, you keep moving down the list.
so last year, it was community services, then public safety, public works, conservation and development, general government, debt, library, schools, enterprise funds. So if we went with that theory now, conservation and development would be first, community services would be second, and public safety would be third, among those 3. It still doesn't answer where you're going to put the schools.
Okay.
You could start with debt, then decide if you're going to do government or schools next.
Or
Library.
library.
Right.
That would be the rotation, and then within the town, it would rotate within that. But I think if you just had a pattern, I think that would work better. I prefer that. And then you're fair to everybody, and no one can complain, well, I've been the last 3 years, we say, well, it's the luck of the draw.
So last year it was general government, the town, the library, the schools, and then the enterprise funds. So you could do schools, then town, then library.
Okay, so,
Janice, you better be
Just
taking
tell me
very
what's
good
wrong.
minutes.
yeah, I will get to this in a minute. We'll get it finished in the end. The newest member of our committee, I guess, is Anurag.
Well,
So
we could ask
Well-
Mercedes.
So
that's fine. We'll let you do
We're
the
gonna
draw.
pull them again, we're gonna draw.
Yeah. So,
This is just the three broad categories: library, schools, and town.
Oh, okay.
Select one of the three.
I won the middle one. Right.
Oh, isn't it?
that is the first. Okay, what is it?
Go ahead and open that
Oh, I
up.
have to say?
Yes.
You gotta show
You
your
have to
cards.
also,
You're
it's, you have to widen it out. 'Cause it's
Library.
library.
Okay.
Library, they'll like
Yes.
that.
Okay.
There too.
How about somebody else draw next?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I
Oh,
know
you
you.
get a draw.
Okay.
Winfrey.
We get to blame you.
Who's going to be mad at me?
That's right.
It was it's on television. It's
Schools.
totally.
Oh, so
The town goes
okay.
last. And then three.
Okay.
And then within that, we'll do the rotation. Is that?
Yeah, and then we're going to do it at the rotation from last year for the three. We'll take public safety, the general government, and then enterprise funds, and we'll make it
Wait.
therefore.
What is our
Say that
order?
again?
Say that order.
So
again.
what was it?
So last year, the order was community services, public safety, public works, conservation, general government, debt.
So we're going to do conservation, community services, and then public safety.
Yes.
And then general government, and then enterprise funds. Public works, then
Public works.
general government, and enterprise funds. So I'll read it again. A second.
But debt was first, right? You were saying with debt.
Yes, so we're going, this is the order: debt, library, schools. Then we're going to the town functions of conservation, community and development, public safety, public works, general government, and enterprise funds.
It's almost like it is on the sheet that you gave us.
Totally.
Ooh. That's
Almost,
scary.
but not quite. No, general government is
Yeah,
not.
okay, well,
General government
yeah.
and debt are together at the beginning, so that's not true. Okay, I will, we will make that the order probably in how we do the book under the circumstances that we're at. It would make sense. I will let TMCC know what we have decided. As far as the,
And Maria Rocker.
yeah, well, Maria will know because she's who wrote the report. Liaisons and committee reports, any member reports, people who've met with the boards and committees that haven't otherwise been already discussed tonight. Okay, we have minutes of one meeting. It is the last meeting of April 5th. And does everybody have the opportunity to review and comment on?
Doug, I'll move to recommend the minutes of April 5th.
I'll second.
Okay, there's been a motion made by Doug, seconded by Janice to adopt the minutes of April 5th. All in favor indicate by raising hands. Okay, so it's 6-0, one member absent. And I think we were all there for the meeting, so that is entirely appropriate, which then takes us to the next meeting and agenda. And the next meeting is a week from tonight. And the agenda is to hear the presentation on the zoning articles and we make our final decision on petition articles 29 and 30 and handle any other unanticipated items that may arise. And the agenda will otherwise look similar with the usual opportunities in case there are member reports or whatnot. Okay.
We didn't quite finish with the report business.
Okay, was there other things you wanted to
on the
do?
report, just to make clear our deadlines. We haven't, Sandy and Andy and I haven't really talked about this, but we're going to have to be proofreading this Tuesday, right? Next Tuesday?
Yeah, Tuesday at 1 is when we're meeting.
Maria,
on Tuesday at 1?
Tuesday at 1, and Maria is actually, in order to proofread it, Maria has to get it into the report. What happens is that Kay, Sandy, and I will get a copy of a proof of the report that looks almost identical to what you finally see in the report, and that is what we proofread on Tuesday. She is working on Monday, even though it is a holiday, and she is.
Actually, she'll be working on Sunday too.
So what's the drop dead?
Yesterday.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Is it really?
Yes.
If you can possibly get it written into us by Saturday, that would be.
Well, I'm leaving town tomorrow at 10,
Uh,
so it has to be done before 10 tomorrow. I have 2 hours in the morning to do that.
So you have general government, is that the major one?
That's the big one. The reserve one, like you mentioned, was pretty straightforward. General government, I could use some help. So
I didn't bring my report from last year.
Yeah, I think I have it.
We'll do that after we adjourn. Let's let the committee adjourn so
Okay.
that, because this doesn't need the committee present that discussion. If there's nothing else, then I would take a motion to adjourn at 9:25. And the motion has been made and seconded, and it appears that there was a majority of the members of the committee raising their hands, offering to second, so I take it as a positive vote that we are adjourned at 9:25. Thank you everyone who took an interest. Thank you, Amherst Media.